Let's move now in terms of looking to the future and what the gold standard looks like for patient participation in research. Nadine, can I come to you and ask if there are any kind of examples of good projects that you've been in that you think, yeah, that really worked?
Yeah, so as I said before, I have been included or joined actually quite a number of projects, and I had to really think hard about this one, like what to pick. And I mean, again, since I'm also a researcher, I think like not the most fun, but also, where I maybe felt most comfortable is like co-authoring, not several publications, I think like 2 or something. So that was really interesting for me to co-author publication and see how it all came together. And that was like a really interesting project for me personally. And I have spoken on many different occasions, like let it be webinars or lunch and learns, or I don't even remember. I mean, I've given so many interviews as well. So I think that was also always very valuable for me to provide my perspective. And, like when I started, I was like, why would anybody want to hear my perspective? But at some point I realized, no, actually it does matter, because I said at the beginning, like we are the experts. And so it is also important that we share our stories. And that's why I hope like when I share my story that again, others get motivated and maybe do the same. So, empower others that they also share, so we can kind of, that the load is not, on just a few people, but that we can kind of share all of the activities. And since again, I know how important also patient samples are, I don't know, it's not a project, but I have donated, for instance, like different samples for a biobank for research, where researchers can actually request those samples. And again, since we're a small patient group, that's really important. And I think maybe the biggest project, if you can call it, is obviously my PhD on FOP. So, and I think sometimes it puts me in a bit of a difficult situation, because, on the one hand, I'm the patient, but then I'm also a researcher researching my own rare disease. And, mentally that can be also actually really difficult, because if you are confronted the whole time with the rare disease, may it be like in your daily life, then in your professional life, that can be actually quite challenging to always be having the thought about FOP and hearing others talk about FOP. But I think, having those different perspectives also allows me to actually educate my colleagues to, once in a while, maybe kind of reset them. And like we said before, like actually point out what is important for the patients, because as Chris said, like not do research for researchers, but actually think about what is the impact for the patients. Like if we find out, I don't know, this mechanism, does the patient benefit in the end from this? Or is it, kind of for our own sake that we understand it better? So yeah, just to name a few here.
Can you give us any examples of really well-designed projects that have delivered value that you've been involved in directly?
Yeah, I think fairly recently, actually, we were involved as a global community with a burden of illness study. And what was good about that was that it was global. It was as inclusive as it could be, but the outcomes are reported back and fed back to the community. And actually the outcomes of the study have a material difference to the community itself. Whether that's just understanding that you're not the only person with a particular problem, or you're not the only person facing the same challenge, or whether ultimately something like a burden of illness study could feed into drug approval processes, really empowering the patient narrative, the patient story. When we say that X number of patients struggles with this, we have quantitative data alongside the narrative to support it, which is really important. So that was a kind of a more recent, really good example of a patient engagement project. Fantastic. And it kind of speaks to good versions in general. It really needs to include the patients, but also listen to them and act upon what they hear. And as we've already mentioned a few times now, is the feedback. Yeah. It really, the best ones are a win-win for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And Judith, what role does this real world evidence play in the healthcare setting in terms of the future of policy and research? I know you sort of started a little bit by saying that some of this work that you're doing has actually informed your research direction. So is there anything you'd like to expand on that?
Yeah, so I think particularly in the rare space, we're increasingly understanding the value of real world data, because, you know, if you've got a particularly rare diagnosis, you can't run a massive randomized controlled trial. It's simply impossible. So, you know, collecting data within a clinical setting and looking at, you know, what, you know, how somebody gets on with a treatment or something that, you know, is licensed. So I've got an example in another disease where a medication has been licensed, it's still undergoing its NICE approval, and we're collecting real world data in terms of patients who are on that medication at the moment to back up what was a relatively small clinical trial, because organizations like NICE don't, you know, they want as much data as possible. So I think increasingly we think it's valuable. Both, and I think it also backs up some of what Chris was talking about, putting numbers to the story. So, you know, you can say, you know, we know that patients suffer with, let's say, pain as an example, and then you can put some numbers to the pain to sort of beef that story out. So I think that's it, you know, okay, randomized controlled trials are number one, top highest level evidence, but actually we, particularly in rare diseases, we need to look at a bigger picture. So some lived examples, some patient priorities, some real world data. And it's a bit messy doing it because it's not all there, and it's a bit incomplete because not everyone comes to their appointments or does the questionnaire, or they miss out this question or whatever. But I think that, you know, I do think it's in increasingly being valued in this space.
Absolutely. We have got some questions coming, so we're gonna get to those shortly. But yeah, and if I can just come to you in terms of the gold standard. So what does the gold standard look like for you, and what can we really strive to do to ensure that companies are designing engagement programs that demonstrate value and keep patients at the center of this?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think it's always challenging, you know, to define what the gold standard is. If we kind of look a bit back, you know, patient engagement is still a relatively, you know, new field, I would say, where I believe, you know, things are still kind of getting structured. And again, there is this trend of increased involvement of, you know, the patient perspective from different stakeholders. So I really think the future, at least, and what, you know, kind of we're aiming towards is actually more kind of examples of what good looks like, and what are the standards towards which we are kind of aiming for as, again, I think, a collective. There are initiatives like the patient-focused medicines development, you know, the IMI paradigm project, or even the ongoing FDA consultation around, you know, patient-focused drug development that I think aim to try to set these standards, but it is a bit, I think, of an evolving field. So I think it's gonna be something really interesting to watch for the next couple of years. I think just generally, you know, as a company, I think we really need to reflect on what we also heard a lot today, is the burden, you know, that you know, kind of some of these projects can put, especially on patient organizations, and try to identify ways, because at the end of the day, it is, you know, a partnership. So ways, you know, for especially smaller organization, volunteer-based organization, to be able to kind of deal with the complexity, the time, you know, and commitment at the end of the day that some of these projects can necessitate, especially if they are getting more, you know, standardized and have an increased, you know, requirement, I think, in the future. So that's something to think about. And there are actually some example, I think, you know, about the Hercules project in Duchenne, you know, which actually looked a bit at that challenge, right, with several, you know, kind of, which was actually patient-led, but also several companies with an interest to generate, you know, similar data at the end of the day, you know, in a given field. So I think it's this type of collaboration which, again, kind of allow to avoid duplication and, you know, I think facilitate, you know, progressing the work on these, which is also the future.
Thank you.
We also need to, and sorry, I'm going to throw this
Oh,
out very quickly. I'm aware of time. is we also need to be wary as patient organizations of managing patient engagement with industry well. Because if we're seen to be too close, that can have a really detrimental effect when we do come through the drug approval process. So nothing more to say on that, just throwing that out there, something that we need to be mindful of.
Very
Absolutely.
valid point, yeah.
Absolutely. And to end on the patient voice here, and Nadine, what does the future of patient engagement look like for you? And I know it's different across different patients, but what would be your gold standard?
Yeah, I think there are 3 key points to this, and I think all of this had actually been mentioned before already. So again, I think it is important to acknowledge that patients are the experts, and that patient engagement is really not a nice to have anymore. And as Jan was just saying, it is still a new field, but I think we're on a good way. But still, you know, sometimes I feel it is still regarded a little bit as a checkbox exercise, which it isn't. So I think that's really just important that, you know, we lay a framework and that we talk on eye level and that we are treated really as equal experts. And I think also important is that we're involved as early as possible on the project, and, you know, not only towards the end, which would equal again a checkbox exercise, and that we kind of should just approve the project, but really like get us on board as early as possible so that we can actually help design the project. I think that would be my wish for the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to go, we've got a couple of questions here. So Alan here says, yes, the patient is the expert in their own condition. Don't talk to the patient, talk with the patient. So obviously what you said there at the start, Nadine, really resonated with him. So thank you for that, Alan. Also, we've got another one that says, got to say, very wise words from the dad in the rare disease world. So big up there, Chris. I think that was appreciated. But we've got some questions here. So this one says, does the panel believe that for progress in hearing as many voices as possible, especially those living with an ultra-rare disease, it's important to highlight the idea of the rare disease community? And they're talking about whether we should be looking at the commonalities across conditions. So for example, intellectual disability, autism, ADHD, and epilepsy. I don't know if anyone wants to take that as a thought.
I think it's absolutely critical, actually,
Yeah.
and we're involved quite heavily in our obvious category, which is rare bone diseases. And actually, there is a lot of commonality. The conditions may present differently, but a lot of the challenges and the struggles are exactly the same. So that really is kind of a critical thing. And that also speaks to why we should be involved in those umbrella organizations as well, which, you know, cover off these larger categories where we can, again, not be asked the same thing time and again, because the lived experience is quite common amongst a lot of us.
Yeah.
From diagnosis challenges through to accessing care challenges through to accessing treatments ultimately, or hopefully, fingers crossed, etc.
Do you
also say, oh, sorry.
No, on you go, Nadine. On you go.
I was just going to say that's a big yes. So this year I had been involved in a national-wide, so in Germany, the campaign for rare disease. It was for Rare Disease Day, and it was not only about FOP, it was, I think, like 6 different indications. And that was the first time for me actually kind of getting out of my FOP bubble. And I think for me personally, that was really important because honestly, until then, I was not really aware that we actually do face the same struggles, although we have like very different diseases. And also, I think this year, maybe end of last year, I also joined ERN Bond. And also, again, that for me was really very valuable, as Chris was saying, you know, like seeing other rare bone diseases. For me, that really opened my own horizon. And I realized, yeah, you know, there are so many challenges which we as a rare disease community face, and not only we as FOP communities. So yeah, I think that's like very, very important.
Wonderful, thank you. Another comment here really saying research needs to be reported in layman's terms too. As a rare disease mum, my child's doctors do not spend the time looking into his ultra rare disease, so it's left up to me. If research could be reported in terms non-scientists could interpret, it would be wonderful, and I could keep up to date with research and dissemination to my son's medical team. So I think that's a really fantastic lesson for us all to take away. And another comment here, actually, which is really interesting, says, I'm in Australia and my son has Cockayne syndrome, a rare genetic DNA repair disorder that's life-limiting. My child is the only one in state and one of 7 that I know nationally. They've recently fundraised and to access a support group in the UK. But what they're saying really is, how do I advocate when I'm the only one in state? So how do they find a mechanism to feed into research when they're the only one? Any advice, any thoughts on how to find places to plug into?
Tricky one, isn't it?
Isn't it?
I think the only thing that came to my mind is trying to find, similar to what we've just said, something that is related. So a network of similar, I mean, there won't always be similar conditions, but a support network of a kind which kind of you might fit into.
Yeah.
Try and not be the only one advocating, and kind of almost piggyback along for the ride. So we don't do this necessarily, but we have a sister disease called POH, which is even rarer than FOP. And in the UK, we actively support the POH community as well. And, you know, try and find that commonality, try and find something out there. And the finding it bit, I've not got an answer to. Google is your friend. Any and every researcher you could possibly talk to.
It goes
whenever you're traveling, talk to the person sitting next to you. You'd be amazed how many times you accidentally stumble upon someone who knows somebody who's willing to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's
It goes
no
back
easy
a little
answer.
bit to what you were saying, Judith, about you've had cases where, you know, maybe the GPs aren't familiar that there are other avenues that patients can get involved in terms of studies and research. So maybe it's a piece to try, and obviously GPs can't know about every rare disease, but having mechanisms where they can find where can these patients plug into bits of information.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if you're looking at papers about your condition, almost every paper will have a contact detail for the researcher from that paper. And okay, they might be limited in what they can discuss, and or they might be a cell biologist who doesn't necessarily, can't advocate for you, but they may know other mechanisms as well. And if somebody's taken the time to do a piece of research that involves an ultra rare disease, that would be another potential way of looking for, just thinking, Chris, about looking for similar diseases. Somebody who's done research and it might go, oh, it's similar to this, and be able to signpost you. It's really challenging. Or you could do like Chris did and set up your own patient organization. Started with just, didn't know that, and other people with FOP, really.
One completely left field idea that sprung to mind was go and speak to people like Nadine, PhD students, researchers, people who are just starting their careers, who may have a project that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
May pick up an interest on your condition, which is known so little about. And then you've got more, you're more than the only squeaky wheel at that point, and just hopefully you get a bit of momentum and build.
Definitely. Well, that's all of our questions. So thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate you being so generous with your time and your insights. Big thank you to Ipsen for helping us, bring this conversation to everyone today. Thank you to everyone for listening and for bringing us your insightful questions and comments. If anyone does have anything that they didn't get a chance to ask during today's session, please do feel free to reach out on the contacts page that will come up at the end. And just hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. It was great to speak to you all. And yeah, thank you so much. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.